Chris in Oklahoma, you're on with Matt and Mandisa. How are you?
Hello.
Hey, I'm good. How are you two?
Pretty good.
Doing well.
Well, I just first wanted to say I've been watching your show for about a year now. I watched your debate with Trent Horn, with Matt Guy, and a lot of apologists. And I definitely, of all the atheists I watch, you're definitely my favorite, and all your arguments I found very compelling.
I agree. Mandisa is my favorite.
Yay.
Yeah. So I guess what I wanted to talk about today that and I've watched a lot of your videos kind of talking to apologists, and I feel like maybe they didn't do a really good job at it. And I'm just kind of interested on your thoughts, is just the historicity of Christianity, and really specifically the apostles dying for their beliefs. And I guess the first question that I had for you was, do you believe that the apostles were martyred, or if so, which apostles do you believe were martyred? Because I know there's some evidence that suggests that some of them most definitely were, but then some might argue that some of the evidence is loose and purely based on legend. So I'd start with that.
I really don't have that much of an opinion on it. It's never been that big of an issue for me, because at one point I believed everything that I was told about it. And then at some point I found out that, hey, I don't really have good reason to believe all that. But the fact that someone died for a belief has no bearing and no impact on whether or not the belief itself is true. So if a bunch of apostles died and were martyred, okay, that's doesn't say that what they died for was real. And if none of them did, then that also doesn't tell me if it's real. So that immediately became a non-issue as soon as I understood the nature of epistemology. If your claim is there is a God and it's this God, then you need to present evidence for that. And it's not evidence basically telling me somebody died and was martyred, just tells me that somebody believed. Well, the truth is not impacted anyway by the number of people believe it, or how strongly they believe it, including whether or not they're willing to die for beliefs. People have been willing to die for things that aren't true. I'm not saying the apostles are liars. I'm saying I don't accept the stories about the events related to Jesus and the apostles.
And so, yeah, I understand that. I understand that thought process. Having a belief and even dying for a belief, and even genuinely believing that belief to be true, doesn't make that belief true. And,
right.
And I do fully agree with that. But I guess then my question is, why would the apostles choose to be martyred or choose to die in the case that they knew, either if they knew it wasn't true, or I don't know. I guess that's
did you not listen to me just a second ago where I specifically said you don't have to presume that they're lying. I don't know what happened. Pick an apostle that we have a claim of martyrdom, any one of them. Maybe it's true that they were martyred, but that has no impact on whether or not what they believed was true. Maybe it's false that they were martyred, but that also has no impact on it. So what your question of, if we assume that they were martyred, why would they willingly do that if they were lying? Okay, I have not at any time said that I think people knowingly died for this lie in particular. But I do think that there are people who have knowingly died for a lie, something that they did not believe to be true, because they were doing it in service to what they thought was a greater cause. When you go back and look at early church fathers like Eusebius, who it's reported, although I can't confirm this any more than I can confirm anything else, but it's reported that he basically argued that lying in the service of the truth of God was still virtuous, because the ends basically justify the means. And it wouldn't surprise me that someone at some point has died for something that they knew was a lie for some greater truth. One might argue that that is typical amongst many soldiers advocating for political regimes, that they don't necessarily think the specific cause that they're fighting for is true and good, but that the broader truth is. But I don't know. I have no way to assess that. And at the end of the day, none of it impacts whether or not there's a God.
For a moment and ask a question. So we're talking about the apostles that are, now I'm not a Bible scholar, but the apostles are supposedly in the Bible as well, correct? Is that, Chris and Matt, can y'all confirm that for me?
Yes.
So basically, there is just as much evidence for the apostles' existence as actual Jesus. So there's no telling whether they only died according to what's in the Bible, which, as we know, has no historical evidence.
I guess in regards to that, I'll respond to that.
Mhm.
There are extra biblical accounts of the apostles being martyred. And granted, you can make the argument that a lot of those come from Christian theologians at the time. But I would say that it's not just the Bible that says that there were apostles martyred. So I'd first start with that, and then I guess the next thing I'd say is, with Matt was talking about, the church fathers and stuff. The apostles of the apostles have that testimony, and there's testimony that's been passed down. And so, to me, just coming from a Christian background, I just find it compelling when I look at people dying for something that they believe that they saw. I don't believe that proves that what they saw was true, but rather I believe that they do believe they saw something, and they were willing to die for that belief, if that makes sense.
Sure. And I agree that there are extra biblical sources. Now, granted, which apostles were supposedly martyred and how is a subject of a lot of confusion because we don't have good evidence for it. However, for all of these, you can go back to one thing, and that is, let's begin with the assumption that the God of the Bible exists and that he wants us to have a reasonable acceptance of the truth of the things that are in the Bible. Where's the evidence? Why is this God failing to safeguard the evidence? Why are we reliant upon copies of translations of copies of oral traditions and no extra biblical evidence that we can actually confirm physical facts? It's just a bunch of stories. It's very different. I mean, why would God pick, first century Judea to do this instead of now, when we have science and medicine and technology that vastly dwarfs everything back then? Why is it that miracles and any ability to confirm miracle reports have declined in an inverse proportion to our understanding of technology? None of this makes sense. And so every apologist, even the ones that are like, oh, well, I'm trying to be as reasonable as I can and saying, hey, here's these martyrs. I'm told that they did this. And the words that you just used, Chris, were they died most probably because they believed what they saw. However, it doesn't say that they died for what they saw. That's an extrapolation. You don't know who saw what. All you have is stories, and it could be that they believed. Maybe we've got a little game of Peter tells Paul, Paul tells James, James tells John. And so they all believe it because they believe each other, even if somebody didn't actually see something. And now they can sincerely believe that something's true, and they're not even dying for anything they saw. They're dying for something that they heard, which they believe. How do you show the difference between those two situations?
Which is basically the accounts of Jesus in itself. It's I can't remember who it was, but it was the accounts of someone else saying that this is how Jesus's life and how he died or what have you.
But I don't know how to tell the difference between that, and that's where I'm stuck, Chris. But at the end of the day, even if there were 12 apostles who all died and said, I saw Jesus killed, I saw the empty tomb, I saw him revived and saw the wounds in his flesh, I saw these things, and now I'm going to die as a testimony to my conviction and what I saw, that would still, at this point, just be a story that I don't have any reason to believe.
And I guess that's why I kind of, when I said in my question, I was talking about the historicity of Christianity. When I look at the apostles being martyred for these beliefs, and then their apostles being martyred for these beliefs, and the first 33 popes, for example, of the Catholic Church, all being martyred for that same belief. I really appreciate you honestly saying that you agree that it is compelling. And although it doesn't necessarily prove that.
Whoa, Chris.
I didn't say that.
Chris, I don't recall saying that it is compelling. As a matter of fact, I recall explaining why I don't find it compelling.
I must have. I think you said something, and I don't mean to misquote you in any way, so you can cut me off if I'm ever misquoting you. I never mean to. But you said something along the lines of you could agree with the idea that they may have believed what they saw and they were sincere about it. Is that a little better characterization? I apologize.
I as a matter of fact, I said that We don't know what they saw. You don't know if they saw something or heard something. They may have since I said that it's possible that someone may have sincerely believed something or even been convinced they saw something and were willing to die for it, but that has no impact on whether or not the claim is true. That what they saw or their description is accurate. Just like I can accept that if somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, I was abducted by aliens last night." I'm willing to accept that they had an experience and are trying to describe it as best they can. I just don't accept their explanation.
And yeah, and that's kind of an analogy that I hear a lot. I guess then where I see that it becomes different though, the idea of, hey, I saw aliens, and then if someone believes that, and maybe that person even dies for that belief, for whatever reason that may be, they are dying for the belief, assuming that what I had said was true. But when I feel like to some point, if you go back down the line, there had to have been at least one of the apostles, and I believe all of them, but regardless, one of the apostles who genuinely believed they saw something and sincerely died for that belief. And the reason I say believe that they saw something and not they saw something is because you're completely right. This is just someone's testimony, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. However, I find it very compelling that someone believes something enough to be willing to die for it. And at the same time, that's from a firsthand source. It's not like they were born into a family that taught them that their whole life. They were cradled into it, and then that was being tried. Does that make sense?
It isn't compelling to me at all that someone would die for their beliefs. It's actually pretty dangerous and reckless, especially if it is coming from second, third, fourth hand information, if not more.
Yeah, and your position here that
agree with you.
Your position here that for you, at some point, there at least has to be one of them that saw something and believed it is false. You have no way to demonstrate that. You have no way to investigate this. Why is it? If I told you right now, there are people who think that there are holy men who exist only on prana from sunlight, that they never eat anything. And there are people out there who think that they're performing exorcisms. And there are people out there who believe all sorts of things sincerely for a variety of religions and superstitions and things that are, supposedly supernatural. And yet, if it's the case that nothing supernatural has ever occurred, then it is the case that no one has actually ever witnessed anything that's supernatural. Now, until you can demonstrate that something supernatural is real, you don't even get to consider it a candidate explanation. But what we do know is real is people misunderstanding reality, people lying for beliefs. And now there's this chain of building a business. Religion is a business. And now, and I'm not going to do the cheap thing of that makes everything suspect. No. I think this business was built from sincere believers who were basing their information on sincere believers, who were basing their information on sincere believers, etc. But none of that shows that the actual belief is true. And because if that's the case, that we get back to the thing that I mentioned a minute ago. Why isn't that God doing something to vouchsafe for the actual evidence? Why are you able to call in to a show with atheists, and the best evidence you can present is your suspicion that in this long chain of storytelling, somebody actually saw something that they believed? Well, you can't even show that that any of them existed in any kind of way where we can identify a fact from their life. I have no problem with that idea that there were people, but how do you prove a fact? How do you show, hey, they saw Jesus walk on water? You can't show that. They saw Jesus feed the masses with 5 loaves and fishes or 7 loaves and fishes, depending on which version you're going to read. You can't do that. What we have is a book full of stories. Now, why is it that you find outlandish stories more believable just because they're old and a bunch of people have believed them for ages than you would if I told you them today?
No, and that's a great point. For me, then, that kind of goes into the validity of the Bible. Like, who's going to interpret the Bible? How do I know if the Bible's a true account? I mean, you guys were talking about, you're talking about Exodus 21, which is, filled with fun things. And so it's just it's a matter of, it's not for me. I don't say that the historicity is the best proof of God and the Bible is the best proof that God has spoken to man. And that's the reason why God chose, because you said, why would God choose that exact time when he could come now? And I think that's also a really great question.
Where's God now? Why can't God call into the show? Why can't God call into the show or show up on the show? I've been doing it for 16 years, and evidently all he keeps sending is people who don't have any evidence.
And I mean, to that, I would say, I believe that God does work through people, and people like me that do try to call into the show every now and then,
I don't, I'm not as, I don't care as much about what you believe. I care about why you believe it.
Yeah.
You do realize that somebody could call in and say, I believe that, God's reason for not doing it is this, but I don't have any reason to accept that what they believe is true. So telling me what you believe about God is useless unless you fill in the why.
No, and that's kind of a big reason why I started with the historicity, because to me, a big source of that belief for me comes into the idea that there was so many failed messiahs over time, and then when Jesus came, it blew up. And
how do you know? How do you know Jesus came?
Right. I have to ask the question of what historicity are you referring to? Are you actually talking about the Bible, or do you mean the history of the church, or what?
No, that's a great question. So yeah, I'm just referring to really. I would probably start with the historicity of the church. So the apostles, the church fathers, so the apostles of the apostles, and then you look at Peter, and then Peter was. I mean, I'll tell you guys, I'm a Catholic, and so history is all over the Catholic Church, whether it be good history or bad history. But I could look at a present church from the day Jesus died till now, and to me, that I believe that is pretty good evidence that Jesus existed.
No, you cannot. No, sir, you cannot do that. First of all, you cannot show what day Jesus died or if he died at all. And second of all, your church did not begin the day that Jesus died. That's the story, because you want to base it on Peter. But it's not like Catholicism existed in 34 AD. That's not true.
Do you not believe that Jesus died on the cross? I guess that's a pretty important thing we should talk about first then.
No.
I have no reason to believe that that's accurate.
Mm-mm.
Okay. Yeah, see that, because if we can't even come to that consensus, then it's kind of difficult to even prove that Jesus walked on earth, let alone if he was martyred for believing that he was.
If there was evidence for it, then it wouldn't, evidence doesn't care whether we believe it or not. It's true. You'd be able to actually demonstrate that. So it wouldn't care whether we liked it or not.
No, for sure. I guess I would just say, there are a lot of extra biblical accounts talking about, at least talking about Christians in ancient Judea. I mean, and I don't know if you guys, I'm sure you guys have done your research on
Chris. There are no contemporary accounts of anything relating to Jesus's life outside of the Bible. None, not one drop. Nothing outside of the Bible exists with any specific claims about Jesus' life until considerably after that. There's not one contemporaneous historian that wrote a single word about Jesus. All of them were historians who talked to Christians 20, 40, 100 years later to find out what Christians believe about this. There's not a first century historian that was a contemporary of Jesus that wrote a single word about him, period.
And then I guess really then, when people would turn to kind of the works of the apostles and the New Testament, then it gets really into a question of the validity of the New Testament, because a lot of people disagree on when it was written.
Well, again, if we're talking about the perfect word of God, then how can there be any disagreement, Chris?
Well, there could be disagreement between people.
And so I don't believe that there are disagreements, But I mean, I believe that people can look at history and can get very different, can come to different conclusions through it. And you guys put up a really good argument. If this is an all perfect, all knowing, all loving God, then he should have made it abundantly clear what he was trying to do, what he was trying to say, but people disagree. And I think that is a very strong argument against theism, or at least in biblical Christianity, or just Christianity as a whole. But I mean, I guess to me, I think if there is any time in history for God to come, it would have made sense for it to be at that time where Israel was under persecution with Rome, and of all the places for the church really to have its heart, it ended up being
Chris. The best time is now, always now,
absolutely.
Every moment. Why is God playing hide and go fucking seek? That's some bullshit. You are now bending over backwards to try to come up with a reason why God would pick a really untechnologically advanced. Oh, that's when Jerusalem needed him. Well, people needed him at other times as well.
Exactly.
None of this story makes any sense.
None.
And so, I mean, I don't believe that God is playing hide and go seek right now. I mean, there are.
Where is he?
Miracles and what?
Ooh.
Where is he then?
Sorry. Where's God?
Yes.
Well, I mean, first off, we'd have to define God. I mean, we're going to go down.
No, Chris, you are really, Chris, stop. You are really close to pissing me off, because you just said that you don't think God is playing hide and seek, and that God is doing stuff now. And then when I ask, where's God and how do you do that? You're like, well, first we'd have to define God. That's dishonest as fuck. I'm talking about the God that you just claimed you believe is doing things now. You can define it if you want to. What I asked for was evidence to show that that's true.
Okay. That's a fair assessment. And I'm sorry. I don't mean to get you heated up. I'm not at all trying to antagonize or
there's like
anyone
8 other callers waiting.
The reason why I said, no, I understand. The reason why I said we had to define God is because a lot of people will just take God as the God in the sky watching over everything. And I mean, that's not really.
I don't need a lecture, Chris, I'm seriously, I don't need a lecture on what other people think God is. Either you explain why you think that God is doing things now in a way that I can see God, or we're moving on.
Okay. And to me, I would just say through the miracles that have been accounted for in the church, through the existence of the church, through the ministry of the church.
No.
Matt said about what's happening now.
Give me evidence for one miracle right now, because no miracle has ever been confirmed.
The Eucharistic miracles. There's countless of them.
No, there's not. There's stories from the church. You have no empirical evidence for any miracle at all. You are believing the church over science. Show me the science that confirms a miracle.
Well, I mean, for the Eucharistic miracles, they were taken into labs. There wasn't like the church. Like, they were taken into labs to see like if it was pampered with, if it was played with. I mean, this is documented. You could find the peer-reviewed research on it. And that's something.
No, sir. Goodbye, Chris. Goodbye. There's no peer-reviewed scientific information confirming Eucharistic miracles. You have been lied to, but you can email tv@atheist-community.org and present links to the peer-reviewed journals. If there were peer-reviewed scientific journals that confirm miracles, somebody would have a Nobel Prize for proving God. It's embarrassing that you believe this just because your church told you so. Thank you, Chris. We're moving on. If there were scientific confirmation of miracles, we wouldn't be having a conversation.
Right.
This is bizarre.